Welcome to the Marketing Stack podcast, and my name is Burhan. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking to George Kapernaros. I hope I have got his surname right. George is from Greece, and in the episode, you'll see that I make mistake to the reference of Greece, and I screwed that up royally, but it was fun anyway, making the mistake. We talk about a lot of digital marketing. We talk about sort of human behavior. We talk a little bit about sort of trends and what's going on in the industry today. George was a great guest, and I do hope that he comes on in the future. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Enjoy the episode. Give me a little bit of background. Obviously, your profile says that you've done 8 figures with e-commerce businesses, marketing
Yeah,
director at Div Brands, know-how for
yeah,
over 200 plus launches, and a
yeah,
lifetime worth of CRO tests. So conversion rate optimization, that's what CRO stands for. So
yeah.
George, welcome to the episode, and give us a little bit about you. How did you get into what you do, and a little bit about why?
Hmm. So, unlike most people, I came into e-commerce and the world of performance marketing more or less by accident, really.
Mm,
I did not start in conversion-focused marketing. My first job was actually in content marketing
mm-hmm.
for a company called Smarter Change, which is a small tech startup in Greece.
Okay.
But what happened was that I basically did a small copywriting contract on the side, and I did sort of a trial really for an e-commerce company called Div Brands, which was also fairly small back then.
Okay.
And what do you know? The campaign did really well. It blew up
Mm,
essentially, and I had the opportunity to then join Div Brands full time. And that's kind of how I went into e-commerce and performance marketing. I did not plan for it really,
mm-hmm.
but Div Brands grew fast, and I also grew fast in Div Brands. So I started as a copywriter, and I quickly became the lead copywriter, then the marketing manager, and eventually the marketing director of the company. We
Mm,
grew to, I'm telling you this so the listeners have context. We
sure.
grew the company to over 100 employees and contractors in less than 3 years. And that was profitable. There was
Wow.
no investment.
Yeah.
Because usually when a company blows up, there's some venture capitalist or
Right.
something that's paying.
Right.
it was all us. So uh, at the peak of my career, so to say, in Div Brands, I was doing a lot of things. I was
Mm-hmm.
responsible for conversion optimization, for creatives, and for multiple e-commerce stores, really, because Div is a company that owns multiple e-commerce stores.
Right.
I was involved in over 200 launches in total.
Mm,
And anyway, to make a long story short, I think many people can relate to this feeling. There was a point where I felt that I wanted to start something of my own,
mm,
which is why I recently decided to leave the brands a few months ago.
mm-hmm.
And I now have a small agency where I again work with e-commerce companies, but it's a different feeling, having something you own than being part of something bigger
Right.
than you.
Right. Yeah, I know that feeling. But like what you're talking about earlier about having sort of accidental success, um, and I guess because you come from a copywriting background, or that's what you sort of learned, that's what you used as your tool to, one, get the job, and two, just to do your work. Um,
Yeah.
and you were running advertising campaigns as well, right?
Yep, I was not, doing the media buying side per se, but I was involved in them. I understand the metrics, I understand the structure, how it
Mm,
works
mm,
from a technical perspective as well. But it was not actively running
right.
the campaigns.
I
Yeah,
think that like it's nice that you can tie the knot there, because I think a lot of people, a lot of advertisers, a lot of copywriters, they miss the other side, of the
Yeah.
river in terms of they know theoretically how Facebook advertising works, or they know in their newsfeed what it looks like, but the science behind putting the campaign together is sometimes lacking. And for me, I think that like the way you've done it is good because of your deep understanding of the platform, and it sounds like you were working with the media buyers at the brands to figure stuff out together, that it informed the copy, it informed what you needed to write.
Well, my perspective is that if you are not heavily involved in how the platform works, whether that's Facebook or a different platform,
Mm-hmm.
um, you're basically doing yourself a disservice. I think
Right.
it's almost criminal to do that because, like,
Right.
everybody has opinions, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what matters at the end of the day, especially when we talk about advertising, which means that we talk about money,
Mm.
what matters is what works and what doesn't work. And you will never really understand what works and what doesn't work unless you understand how the platform works, how you know
Mm-hmm.
pixels work, how targeting works, how the algorithms work, how policy compliance works. So many
Right.
people have issues with policy compliance,
Yes.
but it's all out there. You can read it, and yet we
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's true.
anyway,
And it's interesting because like when you said what works, I think it's also important to mention that it's not just knowing what works, it's identifying what you want to use as the metric to define what's working. So
mm,
if you're just after clicks, I mean, there's so many advertisers that can get you thousands, millions of clicks in a day, like without even trying, because getting clicks is easy. It's the
yeah,
it's the lowest hanging fruit. But what matters in a business, and you said that the brands was profitable because of your input to the campaigns, it was the ROI, right? The investment versus what they sold in these
yeah,
different brands that they were launching. And I think a
yeah.
lot of, and I'm not being critical, but I am in a way, is that having that understanding, one, it creates continuity in your business or in your job, and two, it it gives you that leg up because there's a bit of initiative there,
Yep, I agree.
right?
I agree.
So in terms of, okay, so we're 2021, we all know what's going on around the world. You're right now in Greece, right?
Correct. Yes.
You're in the famous Athens.
Not
Have you?
traveling anytime soon, unfortunately.
Right. So you're
We actually
you're
have a lockdown here.
oh wow, yeah. So a lot of people are going through that at the moment. And so I I guess I'm a little bit of a historian, and like from a marketing point of view, I do sometimes look back and see how things were before. But I think my first interaction or my first experience with marketing was in Julius Caesar, and obviously this was like ancient Greece, or from Shakespeare's times. The way that the writing was, I'm assuming it was Greece. I don't know, but just in terms of influencing and how writing was done in those days, of how Shakespeare actually wrote copy, or wrote people's dialogue to get people to do certain things, and that is a form of copy. What do you say about that, or have you ever looked into those texts to see what the style was and how things were done?
I think you spoke about a number of things that are not necessarily exactly the same, like Shakespeare, ancient Greece, Julius Caesar. Those are different things.
Right. Sorry.
But no worries. But I mean, like in a vacuum, I think there's certainly value in looking back and
Hmm.
learning from the greats, whether that's a playwright like Shakespeare or I don't know, maybe an ancient philosopher or even, advertisers of the last century. I
Right.
think there's certainly value in that. Regarding what I do or what I try to do at least is that I always try to, when I'm learning something, and copywriting is a good example of that, I always try to find the works of the body of work that has survived the passage of time in a way. So
Mm.
books that have been relevant over a long time. I try to focus on that, and I try to give it context by studying what's actually happening today. And what I found is that usually people either get stuck in the past. So you have copywriters, for instance, talking about those really, really long form promotions that were in newspapers,
Right.
which is not so relevant. I mean, it is interesting, but it's not so relevant when attention spans are decreasing, when
Right.
people communicate through video,
Right.
when there are so many, things fighting for your attention. It wasn't the same as back then. It wasn't the same back then. So they either get stuck in the past or they ignore the past. So the other side of the coin is that I usually see this in advertising agencies. They don't try to work with structure or process or by learning from the mistakes of others. They work by instinct and they improvise. And what this does is that you can do something that's out of the box and really nice and looks great, and that's fine, but it's also very high risk.
Right.
And I don't think it's sufficient in a way.
So, so which books can you recommend or talk about a couple of book titles that you reference?
When it comes to copywriting.
Copywriting, advertising, marketing in general.
So the Bible of copywriting, in a way, at least in my opinion, is a book called Breakthrough Advertising by Eugene Schwartz.
Yes,
I
100%.
think that's probably the best. It's slightly advanced, I should say. So it's maybe not the best intro to copywriting, but it is, in my opinion, the best book on copywriting. To reference something that's more recent, I actually recently read a book. I usually don't read copywriting books, full disclaimer, because I think many of them rehash information in a way.
True.
But I recently read a book by a gentleman called Evaldo. I'll ruin his name. Evaldo Albert. I don't remember his name, but the book is called The 16 Word Sales Letter, I think,
Okay.
something like that. And it was actually really, really well written. It was a small book that basically talked about the architecture of persuasion in a way. And it's a good read, and it's accessible, most importantly. So if somebody is listening right now and wants a good intro to copy, that would be a good reference. I think it's called 16 Word
Yeah.
Sales Letter, I
I
think.
have, yeah, I have it open right now. It's a 16-word sales letter, a proven method to writing multi-million-dollar copy faster than you ever thought possible.
Yeah,
And I
typical
can't,
copywriting title.
typical, yeah, the hook there is really strong. So yeah, you spoke about a couple of things, and let's talk a little bit about attention as we move forward into the future. So obviously we're in an age where we've got uh, LinkedIn, what do they call LinkedIn stories, Instagram stories, TikTok. We've got stories on Twitter now as well. I think they use a different name for it. YouTube Shorts as well. It's kind of like everybody's copying this very short video form clips. And then you've got the opposite. And this is something that happened with me recently is I've seen a lot of good reviews on Netflix and online about the series called The Queen's Gambit. And what was interesting about that, even though this it's not relevant to marketing, it's relevant to attention. The way that the series was done, even though it was only 7 episodes, it got me hooked for 7 hours, which I watched over 2 days because I just wanted to get to the end.
Yeah.
And there's such a stark contrast between sort of how Netflix has been able to keep people's attentions through series versus what we're experiencing online with all these short videos, 15 seconds or
Yeah.
less. What do you think about what's going on in the attention span sort of world online?
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, a comment. I think that's a very stimulating question, actually. Thanks for asking that.
Sure.
I I think that I haven't thought this through, so I could be wrong, but I do believe that getting attention, grabbing attention, requires short form content,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and utilizing attention and potentially building relationships through content
Mm.
requires long form content. So it's not one or the other, it's a combination of the two. And I think there's an element of um, advertising things that look like ads, the classic advertising where
Mm-hmm.
there is an obvious sales argument being made.
Mm-hmm.
I think that because consumers, people, you and I, in all likelihood, don't enjoy that kind of content.
Mm-hmm.
We want it to be short, and and it should get the message across fast before we skip it.
Mm-hmm.
But when something is engaging and when something is not necessarily trying to sell us something, even though it may subconsciously do, like I think the series you mentioned, Queen's Gambit, I think it raised the sales of chess or something along those lines, which is impressive.
Right.
I think they can afford to go longer, essentially.
Mm.
Ultimately, I think that this is a byproduct of the internet, I think. Um, we have more choice
Mm-hmm.
because the world is more decentralized. Back in the day, you would be able to hang out with the people in your neighborhood and maybe the next neighborhood, and that was it.
Right.
Whereas now you have the opportunity to find products, to find communities, to find services, to find like minded people in whatever it is that you choose, thanks to the power of internet, which allows us to organize ourselves in communities.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that when you find something that you like, that's what I'm trying to say. You can go deep into it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why podcasts. Let's take a very popular podcast, Joe Rogan's podcast, the Joe
Mm-hmm.
Rogan Experience. That's why that's so long because people are really into it, so it can't afford to go long.
Mm-hmm.
But when say you have an online shop and you are selling, I don't know, socks, which are not so exciting,
Right.
then you should probably try to make your point shorter and more compact
Right.
instead of trying to create a documentary about socks. Even though that could be interesting, I guess,
Yeah.
I would not advise that you start there.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how much content you'd be able to create from socks, but I haven't tried, so I wouldn't know. Um, but yeah, it's kind of interesting, and I think like while you were speaking there, I was thinking about the the context of the platform also has a very big influence on the mindset that somebody has. So I'll use a real life example is, when you go to a McDonald's, you're in and out, right? It's you want your food quick, and maybe if you're health conscious, I apologize, but I'm just using a fast food example because it's fast, it's food, which may not necessarily
Mm,
be healthy, but the idea there is to get in and out quickly or to get it delivered fast so that you can just get on with what you want to get on. And of course, it's kind of maybe a good, again, a little bit of a judgment is the lazy people's food, I guess, right? Um, versus, if you're going on a date to an ice rink, it's not about the food, but it's about the experience of taking a girl or or your partner or your friend on this date to have a good time for an hour to two. So the context
mm,
behind that experience is longer. And so when you think of Netflix, when I think of Netflix, I'm preparing my mind for a longer session on that platform
yeah.
versus when I'm on TikTok, even though it's highly addictive, you don't plan for the long form, but you end up watching a couple hundred videos in 2 or 3 hours if you get sucked into that vortex because the algorithm is just so good at showing you stuff that you like.
Yeah.
Um, so that combination of short clips strung together in a way to create the long form for the platform, not necessarily for the creator, is the magic trick, in my opinion.
Mm.
And
I think Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you a question around, because like the Queen's Gambit, they were able to string the episodes very well from one to the other, so that you didn't want to take a break. And
Mm,
TikTok and some other platforms, maybe Instagram Stories is getting it more right. I think TikTok is better at this, but stringing together the clips in a way that doesn't create a jarring experience. Because if you watch one short clip and then there's the next one, which is completely different, it's totally out of context, the one that you've just watched, you're not going to enjoy the platform.
mm.
So my
Um,
question there is,
yeah,
in terms of copy and in terms of preparing episodes or content just in general, because you said you have a background in copyright content, you were working in content as
yeah,
well, because you want to try to create continuity on a Facebook page or on a person's content feed. How do you go about doing that and stringing episodes or stringing content together so that you create continuity in your users?
mm. I think a very interesting framework is HubSpot's flywheel when it
Mm.
comes to content, which puts the classic marketing model is the funnel, which starts with awareness and then builds up to the sale. But the flywheel is circular. So
Mm-hmm.
you start with I don't remember the terminology used, to be honest. They are always changing the words: awareness, desire, loyalty, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is that you create content for the different stages a prospect or a customer can be in. It's almost like a relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
You go out with somebody and you don't just ask them to marry you.
Hopefully not.
First, take them, yeah, hopefully. First, you take them to the cinema, then you might go for lunch or for dinner, and then eventually that might build up into a relationship, which may end up in marriage. It's
Mm-hmm.
the same with marketing. There has to be content for every stage.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what that content will be depends on what the business is trying to do and who the customer is and what the product being sold or the service being sold is.
Right.
So there's no one size fits all answer.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's useful and helpful to think of it like a relationship that goes from one stage to another.
Right.
Before I forget it, I want to make a comment about the channels
Mm.
because I do agree with you that channels play a huge role. My perspective on that is that there are basically two formats. It's either something that's intent based, so to say, so you search for something.
Mm-hmm.
That would be Google, that would be YouTube.
Right.
And there's something that the other side is impulse based, is what I call it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you are on Facebook or on TikTok, I guess I haven't really used TikTok so much, but I assume it's the same. And you're just, kind of numb and kind of mindlessly scrolling around.
Right.
Then you have ads or videos shooting up your feed trying to get your attention. And
Mm-hmm.
the distinction I want to make here is that it's an entirely different mode of being when you're searching for something and looking to potentially learn more about it or buy it
Mm-hmm.
than when you're just relaxing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when it comes to intent based channels, it's usually best to, first of all, meet expectations, meet
Mm-hmm.
what the user wants, and try to answer any possible question they may have about
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is that they're searching. But when it comes to impulse based channels, that's when I think the content needs to be shorter and more attention grabbing and almost defy expectations in a way so that
Mm.
it stands out and gets your attention. At
Sure.
least that's how I think about it.
Yeah, and talking back to what you said earlier about risk, there is a fine line between creating something a little bit too jarring or too different, that's actually going to push people away versus grab attention. So in my mind, it's it's kind of, you know, there's a certain style that people are used to, and this is what big marketers call being native, right? Creating native
Mm,
looking ads or native looking posts, is because while it's good to stand out, you don't want to be so far out there that, you know, putting up just a square image of like a I don't know, a nose cut off, while it's going to grab attention, is not the right type of reaction you want to get, right? So you've got to be appropriate, and you've got to be uh, conscious of what.
yeah,
I think you get what I'm saying. It's like you've got
I
to,
do. I do. I do.
yeah. There is a balance there that you need to, and this is again like from a advertising point of view, you get opportunities to test.
Yeah.
And so, speaking of your experience in the advertising copywriting world, and because you've got so many launches under your belt, what was the strategies used to figure out what was working?
Yeah. Um, can you ask that question again in a more? Um, can you explain what you mean exactly, or
Okay,
what
so
was working after you launch or before you launch? Like, how do you decide what to launch? What's
yeah, so I think there's an element of launch where there's a lot of assumption, unless there's a lot of research behind what you're launching. There can be a lot of assumption around like how do you write the copy, how do you create, you know, do the creative, is a video better, is an image better, which platform should we go on, um, and then sort of what was what was the process of the company, or what was your experience in terms of identifying what was working, and then knowing what was, and doubling down on the successes.
mm. So before I answer that, I will say that NDAs are a thing, so
Of course.
I can't really talk too much about what we did at Div.
Sure.
Um, but in a vacuum, what I will say is that before you launch something, you should look for signs of success, of validity of what it is that you're trying to do. You
Mm-hmm.
should not be first in most cases.
Uh-huh.
It's best to be second or third or fourth. You don't want to be late, but you don't want to be first because that's riskier.
Right.
When it comes to writing the copy or the messaging of a store or a launch or any project really, what you want to do is find what people want and tell them that you can give it to them
Mm-hmm.
using language they use. That's what you want to do. And that sounds simple, and it is simple intellectually, but like in practice it can be hard.
Mm.
um, I don't think maybe I you tell me, do you want me to go into detail on how you do that, or
Yeah, maybe why do you think why would you say it is hard? Because even though it's simple intellectually, yeah, like that seems obvious, but yet people are still not applying the principle. So
yeah.
why do you think that is?
That's a very good question. I think the primary reason is that we all think that we know better in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So there are there are many biases we have, all of us have, um, and there's one called empathy gap,
Mm-hmm.
which means that we basically struggle to relate to how other people would feel. Now the thing is that when you write copy, you want to do that. You want to see from their point of view in a way, so that you can talk to them in a way they understand, like, and can agree with.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason why people don't follow the rules is because, in my opinion, people sometimes think they know better, and maybe they do. You know, sometimes
Sure.
being a maverick pays off.
Right. There's always
But
the outlier. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I asked the question because it's kind of, so, you know, when you're an intellectual, or you're trying to build something big, or you know, maybe um your how can I say, your ego is attached to the result of your launch, or to your product, or to your business. You you tend to forget that the simple stuff is what works. And so,
Yeah,
going back to what I was talking about earlier and using frameworks and applying it to what you said, applying it to modern sort of society and attention spans and all this, there are tried and true methods and psychological triggers and language that does and has worked all through time. And if we can use a framework as a starting point, then that gives us already some leverage over a lot of other companies that are just trying to do it from scratch. Like you said, they're improvising.
yeah,
um, and so I think, like, for the audience that are listening, that are trying to put together uh, their marketing strategies or trying to figure out how to improve their marketing, it's like, look at what you're doing right now and try to understand, or try to see, one, is it simple, is it easy to understand, and two, is it just too many steps, too many variables, too many choices for somebody to actually make a purchase, to convert? Because
yeah,
9 times out of 10, in my experience, that's what I've seen, is that, people go to a landing page and there's just so many distractions. The copy doesn't flow. There's no story, or maybe there's just too many things that they can do, and so, too many choices leads to none, and they leave. Um, and so, I mean, this is just basic marketing 101.
yeah.
um, and it's not new. It's not like
It's not.
anybody's.
It's
Yeah.
really not new. It's really not new, and people should know this. There is this gentleman called BJ Fogg.
Mm,
He he's a professor in Stanford, and he
mm,
has this theory he calls the Fogg behavioral model. And what the Fogg behavioral model says is that any sort of action happens when there is motivation, so people want to do something, when there is ability, when people can do something, and
mm,
when there is a prompt or trigger, I think he calls it. So they have a reason why to do it now. And our job as conversion optimizers or marketers or people that sell stuff offline and online is to pull those three levers. How can we increase the motivation of people to buy? How can we make it easy? And how can we give them a reason to do it now? So it
right.
really is simple.
Right.
You're right.
It's
It
a
really is
trifecta.
simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it really is only three things. It's yeah, it's like, I've been selling stuff for a long time, offline and online, for a number of years. And, even though I've studied sales and I've studied marketing and I've studied, like, even before I knew the theory, I was doing it inherently, just out of
Mm.
knowing that I was satisfying somebody's need. And, you know, if you really think about it, what you just said with those three things is, that's ultimately what selling is. All
Yeah.
the systems, all the tools, all the internet, CRMs and email marketing and advertising, like, all of it, they're all designed to do the same thing.
Hmm. I agree.
George.
And I think there's, I'm sorry, I think
Oh,
there's an
go ahead.
element of people overcomplicate things,
Mm,
and they shouldn't. Like, usually, I do this too, by the way, I'm not excluding myself, but usually simple is best, I
mhm.
think.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
Um,
You want to
Go
say
ahead,
something
sorry.
else?
No, 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 I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Oh, no, no, that's okay. So yeah, I wanted to round off the episode. um, so George, where can people find you if they wanted to follow you, or see some of your content?
Yeah.
Do you want to drop a handle, or like, let me know, let everybody know where they can find you?
Surprisingly, I'm not huge on social media, but you can find me on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have Instagram or I don't know all those other things. I'm fairly private. You can find me on LinkedIn by searching George Kapernaros, which is my name, and you
Yeah.
can find my website at georgekapernaros.com, and that's Kapernaros. I know it's hard for some people, so I have to spell it. And in case somebody is interested, I think it's worth your while to, if you visit my website, to go to the resources section. I do have a free webinar. There's no pitch. The topic is how to optimize creative for e-commerce.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's good valuable content. And again, there's no pitch, or I'm not selling a product or anything. So
Cool.
it's just some of the things I've learned over the years.
Nice. So it's a webinar that's curated content or curated your know-how, your summary of what you've seen.
Yeah,
Cool.
pretty much.
I'll link all of your your LinkedIn and your website down below. George, thank you so much for being with me on the episode. I think this was a very juicy episode. We got quite deep on certain things.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Cool. So thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, depending on where you're listening, definitely hit the follow, hit the subscribe, leave a review. Really appreciate that. And definitely check out the podcast on the website, burhanpatel.com/podcast. I'm your host, Burhan, once again, of the Marketing Stack podcast. And I look forward to producing another episode for you in the near future. Take care. God bless. Be safe. Bye bye.